With its advantageous condition of water and land transit, Wuhan was also the only industrial city in the middle reaches of the Yangtze River in the 1930s. Its fall, on October the 25th, 1938, marked the turning point of the Chinese resistance war against Japanese aggression from the phase of strategic defense into that of strategic standoff. Mao Zedong had already predicted this major change of tide just 5 months before. The fall of Suzhou on May 19, 1938, put the situation into great uncertainty. The pessimists saw China having little chance of winning, while the optimists believed that the Japanese military saw a spent force. In a shabby cave house in Yan'an, Mao Zedong worked day and night to complete his essay on the protracted war of over 50,000 characters. He spoke about that theme at a seminar held by Yan'an Society of the Resistance War from May 26 to June 3, 1938. In the essay, he asked, "Will China subjugate?" The answer is no, because the final victory belongs to China. Will China win quickly then? The answer is again no, because the war of fighting against the aggressors will be a protracted war. On Protracted War was published in July 1938. The title page of the first book, printed by Yan'an Liberation Press, carried Mao Zedong's inscription, "Adhering to the war of resistance, adhering to the united front, and adhering to protracted fighting, the final victory will belong to China for sure." Those few words express the essence of his views. Mao Zedong based his analysis on 4 basic features of China and Japan. The enemy is stronger, but we are larger. The enemy is regressing, but we are progressing. The enemy has few friends, but we have many in the world. Tokyo regarded its capture of Wuhan as the last battle in its war against China. However, Mao Zedong predicted that the strategic situation after the Wuhan battle was turning conducive to China. The Japanese emperor worried that millions from the imperial army would become entangled in China. After the Japanese army captured Wuhan, that situation happened. The aggressors were forced to adjust their strategy to face a lengthy war. Mao Zedong's analysis painted a surprisingly consistent picture of events. Soon after the publication of On Protracted War, Zhou Enlai arranged for its translation into English. Mao Zedong wrote in the preface of its English version, "China's great war of resistance is not a matter concerning China only, but it also concerns the East as well as the rest of the world." Xiao Xunmei, also known as Shiming, and a poet of the Crescent Group, published sections of the essay in his English magazine Candid Comment in succession. He wrote in its editorial note, "The book has attracted more attention in China than anything else published here in the past decade." Xiao drove around quietly at night to insert the English version of the article into mailboxes of foreign residents in the vicinity of Joffre Street, so that Westerners could learn the wisdom of an Oriental philosopher. Georgy Dimitrov, General Secretary of International Communist Comintern, said, "No one has ever discussed the war issue as thoroughly as this. It is a landmark work." On protracted war became a guiding principle to China's resistance war.
在论持久战中，毛泽东准确地预见抗日战争将分成战略防御、战略相持和战略反攻3个阶段，而且阐明了每个阶段的特点和应对方策。比如，他说，相持阶段是漫长而持久的，同时又是敌强我弱形势转变的枢纽。他认为，游击战争是促成这种转变的关键。大规模的敌后游击战争在战略相持阶段会成为中国抗战主要的战争形式。
Early in 1939, 1 million Chinese and Japanese troops were deadlocked along the line of Luoyang, Xiangyang, and Changsha. As the map shows, the first few base areas established by Chinese communists in the rear of the enemy were all near the centers of the Japanese occupation. The Jinqiaji base area, founded by the 8th Route Army, was less than 300 kilometers from Beiping. The Maoshan base area, founded by the new 4th Army, was less than 100 kilometers from Nanjing. The interlocking situation of the base areas and Japan's occupation zones drew a lot of attention from Evans Carrison, an American officer from across the Pacific. In December 1937, President Roosevelt entrusted Carlson to travel to Mount Wutai, located on the border of the Jinqiaji base area. He met with Nie Rongzhen, commander of Jinqiaji military region. Carlson said to General Nie that he had participated in World War I, but that it was just mostly firing guns and cannons mechanically from trenches and pretty boring. Nie's operation was so interesting and full of strategic art. He said Nie was fighting with his brain and was also working on politics, economy, and culture besides military issues. He had never seen or heard about such a thing before. After a 3-month inspection, Carlson met with Mao Zedong in Yan'an. He wrote about him with praises. This is a modest, kind and lonely genius. He is striving to win a peaceful, fair life for his people in the depth of a dark night.
Received more of an impression of, the big picture of Mao's picture of the future of China. His comments about Mao in his diaries where he thought he was very bright. He thought he was a brilliant leader.
Mao Zedong completed The Strategy of Guerrilla War in May 1938. He stated in the work that guerrilla warfare was a potent weapon for the Chinese in their battle of resistance. As soon as the 8th Route Army moved into Shanxi, Mao Zedong wrote to Peng Dehuai in a telegram. Though the Red Army doesn't play the decisive role in the crucial campaigns, we do have a unique role to play which fits us very well, namely the truly independent guerrilla war in the mountainous area. 80% of the telegrams Mao Zedong sent to the front line from August 1937 to October 1938 were in discussion of guerrilla warfare. Qigen is a remote village in Shanxi that witnessed a victorious ambush of the enemy by the 8th Route Army. In late October 1937, Commander Liu Bochang of Division 129 predicted that the Japanese would become arrogant after a series of victories and would march on stubbornly despite various small losses. Hence, he set up an ambush at Qigen on October the 26th and killed several hundreds of Japanese soldiers. Then, he broke the regular rule of not to repeat the tactic in the same spot 2 days later with a successful ambush of the Japanese again at Qigen. One after another, classical cases of guerrilla battle in Qigen, Xiangtang, Changle, and many other locations verified further Mao Zedong's military wisdom. He drew more inspiration from the rich practice of current guerrilla warfare, and during the long and difficult period of standoff, guerrilla warfare became more workable and more effective. It was no longer an auxiliary trick following the trench battle or the mobile battle, but a proud new entry in the Hall of Fame in the art of war.
その時だと八路軍と新進軍バールっていうのを進数って言うんですけども、それがその毛沢東の方針に従って戦ったからね。それでそれが非常に中国にとって有利に働いたと。ああいう毛沢東式の持久戦というのは日本では理解しにくいものですからね。それはやっぱり戦いにくかったんだろうと思います。
Following the setting up of base areas by the 8th Route Army in the enemy's rear, in Shanxi and in other hilly places, Mao Zedong made another bold decision: to move his army into the plains of northern China. These flat lands with no place to hide were a brand new challenge for the 8th Route Army, as they had only gained experience in battling from hilly land during their Red Army years. Whilst Luo Ronghuan was to lead the main force of Division 115 into the Shandong Plain in February 1939, his wife, Lin Yueqin, gave birth to a son and asked him to name the baby. Luo said, "The troops will march east, so let us name him Dongjin," before leading his army onto the eastward march of hundreds of kilometers. Leading Division 120 eastward into central Hebei Plain was He Long. Leading the main force of Division 129 eastward into southern Hebei and the nearby plain was Liu Bochang. And leading the main force of the new 4th Army from the south of the Yangtze to the north and east, creating a favorable position of straddling the Yangtze River, was Chen Yi. From the winter of 1939 to the summer of 1940, the main force of the new 4th Army marched northwards. A section of the 8th Route Army moved southwards to open up northern Jiangsu base area. From these impoverished mountain areas, the 8th Route Army and the new 4th Army now set foot in affluent coastal plains. They quickly established close ties with the locals and entrenched themselves deeply in the vast land of north and central China. In the enemy's rear, guerrilla war was also initiated in northeast and south China. In very harsh and isolated conditions, they persisted. Dongjiang, Zhujiang, Qiongya, Hanjiang, and other guerrilla columns in South China established anti-Japanese base areas in Guangdong, Pearl River Delta, and Hainan Island. The anti-Japan United Army in the northeast displayed the heroic spirit of the Chinese nation, fighting independently against the Japanese and its puppet army, year in, year out. News of the deed of the 8 women plunging into river was circulated amongst the people far and wide. In early October 1938, a section of the United Army ran into over 1,000 enemies by the Mudanjiang River. Led by Director Lang Yun, a female regiment fought hard to cover the main force attempting to break through the siege. Running out of ammunition and food with a river at their backs, Lang Yun and 7 other heroines destroyed their guns and walked into the river, arm in arm. The youngest amongst them was 13, and the eldest, Lang Yun, was 23. Lang's husband had died in a recent battle, and her daughter was only 2 months old. At 4:45 a.m. on September the 1st, 1939, a total of 1.5 million German soldiers from 56 divisions stormed across the Polish border from the north, south, and west. In less than a month, Poland fell under the lightning assault of German troops. After its success in the east, Nazi Germany began its second phase of war, shattering Western European countries one by one. On May the 10th, 1940, Germany attacked Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France on the west frontier. While the war in Europe was at a critical stage, Chinese troops launched the Changsha campaign from September to October 1939. On September the 14th, 1939, Commander Okamura Yasuji led more than 100,000 people to move on Changsha from 3 directions: Hubei, Jiangxi, and Henan, in an attempt to control the transport line between Wuhan and Changsha. Beginning in Pingjiang County and flowing through Linxiang and Yueyang for no more than 108 kilometers, Xinjiang River became known globally overnight. From 1939 to 1944, in 4 assaults on Changsha, the Japanese had to begin from this small river, the first barrier on their way to southern progress. This young officer is Shi Enhua, at the time commander of the 3rd Battalion in Army 52. Married for only 3 days, he came to the front line to lead his battalion of over 500 soldiers in defense of Mount Leigong and Ridge Caoxie on the northern bank of the Xinjiang River. The area was directly in the path of the Japanese advance. Beginning on September the 20th, Nara detachment of over 3,000 Japanese soldiers took turns to attack Shi Enhua's position, covered by artillery fire. By the evening of September the 22nd, 29-year-old Shi Enhua and his battalion had fought the enemy to the last man, and every last one of these 500 young Chinese men had died in action. Chinese troops eventually recovered Changsha and other places, including the Xinjiang River, which ran red with the blood of Chinese soldiers. Coordinating with the main frontier, the 8th Route Army were active in the rear of the enemy, repeatedly dealing heavy blows to the Japanese forces. Huangtu Ridge is located at Laiyuan County on the northern slope of the Taihang Mountains. There is a gap between high cliffs, and a narrow riverbed lies at the bottom. In late October 1939, the Japanese launched a so-called Big Sweep to wipe out anti-Japan base areas in the mountains of northern China. On the dawn of November the 4th, Commander Yang Chengwu of the sub-area in the Jinchaji military zone received information that over 1,500 Japanese soldiers were on their way from Jiangjiakou. They were led by their commander Abe Kishu to conduct a big sweep in an attempt to avenge their defeat 4 days before. 2 battalions of the 8th Route Army exchanged fire with the Japanese at Baishakou as planned. They then gradually retreated towards Bizi Ridge.
这个阿布啊，有点名堂。他进到黄土岭以后，他摆了一路长蛇阵，他自己亲自看着表，这个10分钟1个钟队出发，10分钟以后再1个钟队出发。 帮我们拉得很长很长。
It was pitch black with heavy overcast clouds. Various sections of the 8th Route Army were quietly outflanking the Japanese into a siege. At 3 p.m. the next day, the Japanese forces had arrived at the gorge east of Huangtu Ridge. The 8th Route Army charged from behind and forced the Japanese into a gully 1 kilometer long and only 100 meters wide. The fighting was fierce. "74 years have passed, but Chen Hanwen remembers the battle scene clearly. He was only 7 when Abe Kishu's command post was set up in his home.
我记得我在这儿坐着，有我奶奶抱着我，阿爸给小孩还靠着我，他坐在这儿了，他后院是的，支着那个电话呗，把那线拉好以后，他都说他们日语叽里咕噜的，咱们听不懂。
After discovering Japanese officers in the small courtyard, artillerymen of the 8th Route Army fired 4 shells. Abe Kishu was wounded in the abdomen and both legs, and died a few hours later.
那家汪一下一响，这是狼吐泡烟的，这上那掉下来的那泥皮也不少，跟下来的。那时候他往后一撵，我心想，你这回坏了，肯定打着你。你不能你不撵啊，这好像是我哭过那一样，都到这儿了。
Abe Kishu was the first Japanese lieutenant general killed by the 8th Route Army. With the banner headline reading, "Flower General Withers on the Taihang Mountains," posted for 3 days, Asahi Shimbun lamented the unprecedented sacrifice of a lieutenant general of the Imperial Army. At the cost of 540 casualties, the 8th Route Army had killed more than 900 Japanese, seized 5 cannon and hundreds of guns from the battle at Huangtu Ridge. The 8th Route Army and new 4th Army in central and north China surrounded the Japanese and wore them down with continuous assaults.
What does communist forces do in terms of continuing the war with Japan is, A, importantly, keep resistance going. Keep up this image of a China that is willing to continue to fight Japan, cost what may. That is undoubtedly important. They're also important in drawing Japanese forces away from nationalist areas. So it splits the Japanese forces across China, making it relieving the pressure on nationalist areas. That too is important to create lots of trouble. War is about creating trouble for the enemy in any way you can, and they do that very well.
After Japan seized Guangzhou in late October 1938, there were three main routes of international transportation into China: the Northwestern Line, the Yunnan-Burma Line, and the Guangxi-Vietnam Line. The latter was the most convenient and best used. On November the 15th, 1939, Japan dispatched a large army of infantry, cavalry, and marines to land at Qinzhou Bay in a bid to cut off international aid to China through the Guangxi-Vietnam Line, and they seized Nanning 9 days later. The Kunlun Pass, an ancient battlefield, bore witness to a famous battle in the anti-Japan War. It was at the foot of Highland 441 that Masao Nakamura, commander of Japan's Brigade 21 of the 5th Division, was buried. The 5th Army, engaged in battle with Japan's 5th Division, was at the time China's only mechanized troop. Their task was to recover Kunlun Pass. And it was here that the two elite armies were locked in a fierce dogfight. On the dawn of December the 18th, the silence of the mountains was broken by a trail of shattering explosions. China's counterattack had begun. Covered by roaring tanks, cannon and planes, Chinese soldiers descended on the Japanese positions.
面的军的军攻势很坚固，另一方面呢，有2个机枪碉堡交叉的火力，使我们部队呢攻击不上，牺牲了好多人。就是我深夜呢就带着1把步兵，带着手榴弹，这个炸药，或者还有爆破筒等等的爆破器材，摸到敌人的碉堡后头，打到这里以后呢，趁敌人不备，我们就把手榴弹丢进敌人的这个碉堡里面再加油。这个日本鬼子非常狡猾，看到手榴弹还没爆炸的时候，他又把它扔进去了。结果我们这些只好的买，采取用这个炸药把它捆得一捆一捆的捆到一下子。这个机枪带走的就是轰隆一下，这个碉堡机枪鬼子的就一下子冲上去的。
Commander Du Yuming of the 5th Army ordered a general attack on December the 31st, and by 11 a.m., the Chinese army had recovered Kunlun Pass. Although there were over 16,000 casualties, the Chinese army had killed more than 4,000 Japanese troops, including the brigade commander, and wounded several thousand more. Most of them were officers. Also seized were 102 captives. On May the 10th, 1940, Germany pushed into France on the West Line. After fighting against the invaders for less than 40 days, France surrendered. The Nazi war machine continued its path of destruction, but Hitler was surprised when the supposedly invincible German troops met stubborn resistance from the United Kingdom. In August 1940, Germany launched an assault on Britain, but the British people were unyielding. Both Chongqing in China and London in Britain suffered continuous bombing from the fascists. Under the leadership of Winston Churchill, the British withstood the airstrike, blocking Germany's Sea Lion plan to land in Britain. Starting September 1939, the war in Europe gradually became linked to the war in China. The three fascist countries, Germany, Italy, and Japan, strengthened their alliance. On September the 27th, 1940, German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop, Italian Foreign Minister Galeazzo Ciano, and Japanese Ambassador Kurusu Saburo signed the Alliance Treaty of Germany, Italy, and Japan on behalf of their governments, and marked the formation of the Fascist Gang in an attempt to redivide the world and seek global hegemony. In the latter half of 1940, China and Britain were the only two major global powers willing to defend the world against fascist aggressors.
I don't think in 1940 there's a real cohesive set of either Axis or allied powers with a common strategy. But I think the role of China in this is very important in that it doesn't give up. It goes on. So I think in that sense, it does begin to make sense. China has an international role that is actually important and that has been ignored for far too long.
Fighting in both the front and the rear of the enemy, the year 1940 was a tremendously tough year for the Chinese. General Jiang Zedong, commanding Army 33, fell in the Zhaoyi campaign defending Chongqing and became a martyr. Yichang fell and the country was shocked. The Yunnan-Burma line of international aid was severed, causing a desperate shortage of supplies. The price of rice was soaring and people were struggling to survive. Japan's puppet government of Wang Jingwei was founded. The voice of reconciliation was once again heard from Chongqing. Military forces and base areas in the enemy's rear had a hard time after an unprecedented expansion. The Japanese planned to destroy the anti-Japan base areas in North China. Japanese occupiers started their so-called cage policy to seal off villages with railways, watchtowers, ditches, and high walls. It was designed to gradually compress and strangle the anti-Japan base areas. Over the course of summer 1940, over 3,000 stations, 10,000 bunkers, 5,000 kilometers of railway, and over 3,000 kilometers of motorways were set up by Japanese army forces. For a while, the beautiful, fertile Hebei Plain was turned into a ground of terror, punctuated by watchtowers, tombs, mourners, and black smoke. The anti-Japanese base areas were isolated from the outside world and from one another. Zhengtai Railway, linking Taiyuan and Shijiazhuang across the Taihang Mountains, sat center of the cage as a blockade between the headquarters of the 8th Route Army and Division 129. The 100-plus counties under the control of the 8th Route Army were mostly taken by the Japanese, all except 2, and a powerful counterattack was imperative to save northern China from becoming another Manchuria. Peng Dehuai, deputy commander of the 8th Route Army, ordered a large-scale campaign be launched to destroy the traffic blockade by the Japanese army. And on July the 22nd, the 8th Route Army headquarters issued the Preliminary Order of Campaign to the Central Military Commission of CCP and its combat troops. Eighth Route Army mobilized 105 regiments to launch what was later known as the 100 Regiments Campaign along the Zhengtai Railway. The 249-kilometer-long Zhengtai Railway was the center of 7 main railways built by the Japanese occupier across northern China. They stationed 3 mixed brigades in over 50 main bunkers and multiple peripheral bunkers covering a 10 to 15-kilometer section. Mount Shinao, southwest of Yangquan County, was at the throat of the railway network. It was here that the 100 Regiments Campaign began on the night of August the 20th, 1940. Commanded by Chen Xilian, Battalion 385 of Division 129 took the lead to attack Mount Shinao during pouring rain. 15 regiments of Jinchaji military region plunged onto enemy checkpoints and bunkers along the Zhengtai Railway.
就是全军的北外呢，外队呢，咱们部队的和日本人打呢，唯一这个就是在炮台上和敌人打呢，那敌人那个没不下不来，那就全军们的北外呢，把铁轨来得走啊。
The Japanese were stunned. Communications were severed. Gunshots were heard at headquarters, but no one knew what had happened. In northern China, Commander Tada Suruga of the Japanese army ordered an air scout. It was only then that they realized the entire Zhengtai Railway was submerged in a sea of Chinese soldiers and civilians.
我们这个任务就是和地质同学联络，把这个电线给它切断。每天晚上出去啊，切入一段，这一段一个时候是一个是15里地，分2个组，同时切断这个，它就不能用了。
Herlong's Division 120 in the 100 Regiment campaign was charged with the task of attacking Tongpu Railway and Fenli Motorway, north of Pingyao County. They attacked by night and withdrew before dawn. Their offensive paralyzed the northern section of Tongpu Railway and the motorway between Taiyuan, Fenyang and Lishi. Seizing Liangzi Pass, the 9th pass of the Great Wall, 8th Route Army soldiers erected their flag on top of the pass proudly. It signified the victory of the first phase of the campaign, to sabotage the Zhengtai Railway. On this stone tablet, kept in Laiyuan County, is inscribed a poem by Koshiba Toshio, the Japanese garrison commander of Laiyuan, recording the sad defeat of his countrymen in the Lailing battle. This photo shows the joy of Li Yongsheng, a company commander of the 8th Route Army, after seizing a light machine gun and 3 rifles from the enemy's hands. What shamed Koshiba Toshio the most was the defeat suffered at Dongtuanbu. He left his shame inscribed in verse upon this stone tablet.
背的题目呢就叫做《长恨歌》。战斗应该说非常的激烈。当时呢，这个大佐呢在这上面有4句话，残府天地炮声震，团不一战太凄惨，此处水手警出队，彼处攻随老山团。
Dongtuanbu was the fiercest battle in the second phase of the campaign of 100 regiments. Regiment 3 of Jinchaji military region, an able force from the Red Army days, shouldered the task of attacking the enemy's station. At 8 a.m. on September the 22nd, The regiment, led by Commander Chiu Wei, began to storm the enemy's stronghold. The 27 Japanese soldiers left behind set themselves on fire.
3天3夜，打的他剩下也不多的了，没闹了也。子弹也没子弹了，啥也没了啥了。他们那房顶子都泡在里头，都烧死了。
The Chinese soldiers of Regiment 3 wrestled constantly with the enemy for 3 days until they finally wiped out over 100 Japanese stationed there. More than 200 heroes of the 8th Route Army were martyred in the battle. Today, the Green Mountain is a sacred home to the loyal bones and souls of the heroes who gave their lives and are commemorated here for generations to come. This is Peng Dehuai, Deputy Commander of the 8th Route Army. He was less than 500 meters away from the Guanjiaonao battlefield when army photographer Xu Xiaobing took this picture. The date was October the 30th, 1940. At that time, over 500 Japanese soldiers of Okazaki Brigade had clandestinely maneuvered to Huangyadong, where the arsenal plant and headquarters of the 8th Route Army were based. Peng gave orders to wipe out the enemy, forcing them onto a highland surrounded by deep cliffs and very difficult to attack. The Battle of Guanjiaonao was extremely fierce. Most Japanese forces were killed or wounded, but at great cost to Chinese forces.
这一次战斗啊，虽然没有彻底完成敌人，可是日本人死的相当多。那时候我这亲自跟着刘伯承啊，我妈那个死人这个坟子我数了数，那一个坟子里埋的有最少10个人，死的相当多。
Another commemorative stone tablet was erected in Jingxing County, Hebei Province, 50 kilometers away. Its dedicator is Ms. Mihoko, who lived far away in Miyazaki County, Japan.
最初はそんなして敵だと思ってたのが命の恩人に逆になって戸惑いましたけど、将軍のおかげで命助けていただいて今があるんですよね。でみんな中国の皆さんやらみんな日本の皆さんたちに助けられたのは皆さんのおかげで助けられたので今があるんだから、感謝しています。
Ms. Mihoko's life was saved 75 years ago during the campaign of 100 regiments. When a battalion from Regiment 3 entered into the Jingxing mine, they found 4-year-old Mihoko and her infant sister as unattended orphans. The girls were escorted back to the headquarters, and General Nie took care of them before sending them back to the Japanese side. "40 years later, in 1980, the People's Daily published an article with the following headline: "Where are you, little Japanese girls?" Journalist Yomiuri Shimbun was moved enough to track down and find Ms. Mihoko. Already a mother of 3, she left the small grocery store that she runs with her husband in Kyushu to make a special trip to China and visit General Nie. Now nearly 80, Ms. Mihoko is grateful for her hard-won life of peace. She prays for a friendly relationship between Japan and China so that future generations may live in peace. On January the 24th, 1941, the campaign of 100 regiments was finally declared victorious. Records collected by the 8th Route Army show that during the first 3.5 months of the campaign, in their 1,824 battles and skirmishes, 46,000 Japanese and puppet soldiers and 47 defectors were killed, as well as destroying 2,993 strongholds, 474 kilometers of railway, 1,502 kilometers of motorway, 37 railway stations and 213 bridges. The 8th Route Army suffered 17,000 casualties. The 100 Regiment campaign was the largest and longest campaign fought by the 8th Route Army in the strategic hinterland of the aggressors in North China. The assaultive operation disrupted the enemy's major lines of transit in all areas except Shandong. The campaign delayed the Japanese fascist plan severely and forced them instead to focus on restoring security in North China as a top priority. Showing the world the strength of CCP armed forces gave the Chinese people great inspiration. The Japanese occupiers now began to gather their major forces against China's 8th Route Army and the new 4th Army, as the two fended off an estimated 60% of Japanese forces and almost all of its puppet troops. The battlefield behind the enemy line was to become the main stage of war in China.
日中戦争で日本が敗北をした最大の理由はやはり中国の持久戦略、これだと思うんですね。つまり県としての戦闘においては日本軍が勝利したケースはたくさんあったかもしれません。しかしながら中国の戦略として長期にわたる戦争継続の中で日本の軍事力および日本の国力を消耗させていく、これが日本の敗北の最大の原因だというふうに思いますね。
Using persistent strategy and guerrilla warfare, this nation resisted the ruthless Japanese Empire with tremendous wisdom and courage. The growth of communist military power, its expansion and stubborn disruptions in the rear made it impossible for Japanese invaders to conquer China. However, just as Mao Zedong had predicted from the beginning, strategic stalemate was a long and tough affair. The war was far from over.